sounds mysterious, and it is, but it's a system that feeds back on itself, right? And you're making us aware of all these other sensations and experiences and thoughts that come into something that's already complex.
Yeah.
And you're taking it step by step. You're photographing each of those steps as a demonstration of your awareness that something important is happening at every stage, even though you don't know its destination.
Yeah, and in that painting, I think many points in that painting, it was horrible. And I like how it ended, but I kind of needed to go down that road to get to the end point. And there was a certain point in the painting where I consciously remember saying to myself, I mean, this is a disaster. And what I need to do is I need to go back in and clean house. And I went in with the bigger shapes, maybe about 4 passages back. And I started to define much bigger areas and get rid of all, it broke itself down into too many complex areas, and it needed to be re-articulated, it needed to be explained again. And I went back and explained it in simple terms again. And that's when it started to come back out again. And that's an important thing too. Sometimes, and I kind of alluded to this, I'll get to your question in a second, that as you are educated, right, you're always taking on new information. More. I think at a certain point, you have to strip things away. You have to take things out of the pail, not just add them. And I now that I look back at it, my decision, I don't know how I came up with this, to go out on the river with just charcoal and paper led to what I do now, charcoal and paper, at its simplest, direct, primordial way. I mean, it's pretty simple. It's an eraser, it's charcoal, and it's pencil, and a brush. I use a brush a lot. I'm always brushing the drawing and getting the material to go into the paper so that it becomes one, so that pictorial field is evened out. Yeah.
Have you ever studied any of the other fields of mathematics? Because pretty much what we've been talking about how you generate your painting where you just iterate over it. There's a method called gradient-based optimization that's effectively what you're doing. You start at seemingly random points, and they all just happen to converge to a solution. Have you ever studied any of the other?
No. Could you tell me the name again?
It's called gradient-based optimization.
Gradient-based optimization. That's interesting. I'd like to see what's going on there.
Okay.
Thank you. It's interesting. And you see a correlation then between that. All right.
So you talked about visual communications through paintings as a method of visual communications, and I was wondering if it's important for you to actually have the audience understand this process of how you generate the painting, because I think this is like the scientist in me talking, and I constantly try to, when I look at your painting at LSI, I try to understand what part of it is biological, how is this generated so that it relates to life sciences. But I often find, especially in modern art, that is kind of hidden. It's not shown really, it's not very apparent to the audience, and I'm not sure if that really is a good way of generating a two-way conversation.
Well, it's not literal, right? It's not a literal depiction of cells splitting. It's more I think those paintings are certainly tied into the history of art. Like minimalism and those kinds of assertions that you could just have 1 or 2 colors that are going to have all the information needed to explain themselves. So there's certainly that relationship with what has come before it that help inform the image itself. But the yellow painting in particular, there's this whole, your cones have to adjust to that space. When you take a photograph of it, the camera just gets that 1 second, and it really doesn't get the sensation that happens when you look at that area where those things are converging. And that, to me, is where it's special. That's where it's creative, because as an artist, I think the goal is not necessarily to have you look at the painting. The goal is really to have you travel into a different consciousness through the painting as the vehicle. So what you see isn't necessarily what the artist wants you to see. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, my question was actually about, so after hearing your lecture today, now I really understand like what you're thinking, where it comes from. And I do this with my artwork a lot because I want the audience to understand where I come from, and I want it to be kind of clear how this was generated. So I like make a description
Like a didactic or, yeah.
yeah, paste it next to the painting or the artwork. I'm not sure if that's like something that you don't want the audience to know, or is that something not as important as?
Oh, I guess I'll say this. I want the piece to stand on its own first. Okay, so I think that's its most important function. That for some reason you see it and you're interested. It draws you in somehow. And then if that makes sense to you and you're interested in that, that's great, like the didactic part. But if not, I think the painting or the drawing has to live on its own. And I think that I'm hoping that what they really become is they become universally understood, not just myopically understood for someone that works in the sciences or someone that works with mathematics or architecture or something like that. Oh, I see what you're doing here. I hope that it becomes more like a universal language. I mean, I don't think you should be able to necessarily read it all, but you should be able to understand it somehow for just what it is. It is just what it is. It isn't something else. It isn't trying to be something else. Those things feed it, but they're not omnipresent. And I don't think we want to tell the viewer too much. I don't think we want to explain too much. I think we want to keep them wondering because I think that that's what opens up the portal for them to imagine and dream and travel into a different state of consciousness. I mean, you've seen some incredible paintings, right, in your life? What happens in front of them? I mean, do you think in those terms, like, what just happened to me? Like, you stand in front of a Rembrandt and you're like, what? Last summer, not this summer, but last summer, I was with my 3 kids and my wife. We were in San Francisco. My daughter was just moving there, and we went to the Young. And I've never been to the museum. And it just so happened, and I didn't know this, that they were having a Richard Diebenkorn show of his work from like 1956 to like 65, which is like his Out of Berkeley series into his figurative work, which I adore and have always showed this work to my students, and I've loved it, as long as I've been a painter. I walk into this place and I just start crying. I mean, literally, I cannot stop. And my 2 boys were so mean about the whole thing because I just couldn't believe how beautiful these paintings were, that I've dreamed my whole life to see them. And here I just fell upon it and was in this room with all these paintings at once. And I really, literally could not stop. I couldn't get my emotions under control. And boy, that is incredibly powerful. And that's why when I was young and thought about studying sculpture and worked with apprentices sculpting, when I went to go to graduate school, they were the moments when I would stand in front of paintings and it would hit me like that. I knew that I just wanted to be a painter. And now, I don't know what I am now. These are kind of sculptural. And they're not really paintings anymore. But there's something about a painting that still really resonates for me. And I don't know if I need to have all the answers. Like, a great poem can be pretty mystical. You read some Rilke or something like that, you don't know what he's really saying in that. The Panther or a poem like that, you don't know what's going on there. You got an idea. You ever read the Letters to Cézanne? You ever read that? He just can't believe it. He spends a whole month in 1907. Cézanne dies. And a year later, they decide to exhibit his work in, I think it was like a government building kind of. And it was open to the public, and it was open for a certain amount of time a day. And it was in, the center of Paris. And Rilke ends up kind of bumping into this exhibit. And he ends up going there every day for a month, the whole time it's open. And every day he writes his wife a letter about the experience. And if you want to learn something about painting, read that little book. But he doesn't even know what he's seeing, but he's actually incredibly perceptive for what he's pulling out of these Cézanne paintings at that time. So.
What's his name?
Rilke. Yeah. What's his first name?
Uh,
Renee or something?
Something Maria.
Maria
Yeah.
Renier
Yeah,
Rilke.
Maria.
R-A-N-I-E-R, Maria Renier Rilke.
Yeah.
What's that book? What's it?
Letters, I think it's Letters to Cezanne.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you just do that, Letters to Cezanne, you'll find the book. It's the kind of thing I would own. I would just buy it, like get it on Amazon and just own it. And it's the kind of book you'll move in and out of. And the other one that is like that, it really, you're going to laugh at this, but Van Gogh's Letters to Theo are unbelievable. You know, I mean, if you want to realize what a painter's about, read those. And I think, the other thing I think is really helpful are artist interviews. You want to learn about making images, read artist interviews. You know, you want to see what the associations are, you know, read artist interviews. Because that's going to tell you what you need to know about making art. Yeah.
So you just now mentioned about sculpture, but pretty much the whole talk has been about you as a painter and everything's referenced pretty much paintings and two-dimensional. But I mean, when you come up with this idea to have a curved canvas, I mean.
I know. Do you believe it? Right.
I mean, do you just call somebody to make me a curved?
Oh, I make them.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
Right. All that I made. Right.
First of all, you got to figure out technically how you're going to.
Well, I kind of like those. It's like solving a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have to figure out how I'm going to bend the wood. You know.
You bent the wood.
Yeah. So I went into that's 44 by 44 inches or so, and I had to figure out how I was going to bend. And what I did once I figured it out, I made 5 of them because I had the jig then. So I made a jig.
Yeah.
You know, I press it, I glue it, and I made 5. So we'll see what happens now. But they're harder than I thought they were going to be.
Oh, yeah. Good.
But I like them. I like what happened so far.
So the sculptural part of things and that whole problem making was just left out of because it's not really part of the, I mean, it is part of the artwork, but that work behind it is,
That's interesting. So I just left that out, huh?
yeah.
Huh.
I mean,
You're a sculptor, right? Well, what do you think of that?
well, I'm not sure what to think of.
I tried to explain why these things were sculptural, though.
And-
Yeah. I thought I explained why they became sculptural, though.
The screen.
The
There,
screen, right, and then the catastrophe one, when I started to see the bending, like the idea that the earth was flexing and bending, and those other ones were about folds. I thought
And I think sculpture needs less color, the question about color.
right, and maybe that's why I've gone that way. But I really do love wood too, and I didn't mention that. And I've actually, as a very young painter, starting as landscapes, I would do my own framing because it was a way to stop painting on the painting. Because if I might work on it forever. So I started to frame the pieces, and I always worked with the wood. So I think 30 years of working with wood has given me some knowledge in how to do things with wood. So if I get an idea, I could do it. It's not that I have to get someone. I wouldn't have someone else do it. That's not how I work. I like to make things. I'm a maker. I'm not just a thinker. I actually like to figure the problem out and solve it. Yeah, but that's a good. I think that's a good comment.
Thank you. Sorry.
Sure.
It was a really good
Yeah.
talk. I enjoyed your.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, 5:30. Thanks, you guys.